he ended up taking a knife and stabbing me in my face and stomach. And
because you wanted to leave.
Yes. And I was like, it's me. I'm the one who called. And then they pulled out their mace and maced me in my face. Trust the fact that these police officers are not doing their job. What a transgender thing to say when I could grow facial hair.
The United Nations considers indefinite or prolonged periods of solitary confinement to be torture.
I swear I was in hell. It was an opportunity for not just my voice to be heard, but for an experience to end.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective Podcast. I'm your host, Carbon.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Mocha.
And welcome to the show. And this podcast is sponsored by Vizzy Hard Seltzer, but more on that later.
The data is clear. LGBTQ2S+ people are overrepresented at every stage of the criminal justice system. And this is especially true for trans people who are subject to particularly inhumane conditions and treatment while incarcerated. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the experience of being trans behind bars. We're using the Canadian correctional system and our guest Moka Dawkin's story as a case study, but this reality is all too common and often worse across the globe. In today's episode, you'll hear Moka's story of wrongful conviction, her trans incarceration experience, and we'll be discussing the systemic criminal justice issues that are plaguing our community.
Today, we are honored to welcome Moka Dawkins. Moka is a Black and Indigenous transgender two-spirit activist who spent nearly 5 years in a Canadian men's prison system after being wrongfully convicted. You may remember her story from the hashtag Justice for Moka. Since her release in 2018, Moka has dedicated her time to LGBTQ2S+ and prison reform advocacy and activism. She served as a lead advisor with Correctional Services Canada. She was Pride Toronto's trans ambassador in 2022 and is now pursuing higher education at the University of Toronto in the Peace, Justice, and Conflict program. Welcome, Moka. Thank you for being here.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
The first place we really want to start is your story, but with it being such a heavy one, I kind of want to check in. How do you feel these days about sharing your story?
Now I feel a little bit more empowered than I did when I first started sharing. Sometimes some people's questions may trigger certain things. It's always in a sense of, I guess you could call it thought-provoking, like you kind of wish you could have done something better. So that's something that really never leaves you. But as time passes, you learn to heal. So I'm stronger now than I was in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you were always strong.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're
God bless
stronger,
you.
for sure.
And hindsight's always 20/20, right? I guess having compassion for the version of yourself that was in that situation and how much you've grown since then too. It was a totally different version of yourself.
Yeah, that's another thing. It was like I had to learn to like love myself all over again because the way people made me kind of see myself and how I kind of felt on the inside, you know, I'm not a murderer. People could say it as an insult or whatever case may be, but you know, those types of things, it was hurtful for me, but I had to learn again to not let those words live in my head and to really know that I am a blessed person. I am a survivor. I am loved, yes, by God, but also by me.
Moka, as a trans woman, you spent 4 years inside of a men's prison after being wrongfully convicted of manslaughter. And to bring our listeners up to speed, I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about your experience with sex work and what happened on August 3rd, 2015.
Starting off as a sex worker, I was in my 20s. I started in Montreal. I then decided to leave and come to Toronto, and I was unable to find legitimate work. So I continued back into the sex trade here in Toronto. That is how I met Jamie Chris Foster. The first time we had met, he invited me back to his place. Everything went well.
And he was a client, just to be clear.
Yes, he was a client of mine. But what I didn't know at the time was that he had just gotten out of prison that April of 2015 for unprovokingly stabbing people. You know, when you're a sex worker, you're not aware of these types of, you know...
backgrounds on your clients,
On August 3rd, 2015, we ended up meeting up so I could get some weed, and I was trying to schedule a time with him to come back to his house because I wanted to see my friends at the club. He ended up taking a knife and stabbing me in my face and stomach. And
because you wanted to leave.
Yes.
Right.
I don't know how I got the knife to this day, but I did. And I swung back. When I was able to get him off of me and disarm him, I called 911. When 911 arrived, he had ended up trying to shoot himself down a garbage chute. And once they got to the garbage chute where he barricaded himself and pulled himself out and called for EMS, it was too late. Not only that, EMS had they said on the stand they had trouble getting into the building. Yeah. So the way Heather made it seem like he had no chance, but he gave himself no chance. So it was just awful for me to then try to translate my experience to the police officers while they're still trying to like call me a murderer and say like I intentionally did this.
Did they look into his record at all? Into his background, into the fact that he was just in prison?
During the trial, they did. I don't know what about at the police station when they had arrested me or whatever the case may be, but he had a lengthy record from his juvenile days of, you know, having a knife as a primary weapon and having a lot of female victims. He only has like 2 male victims, but the rest of them are like assaults on girls he has like dated and he's been with and stuff like that. And like with weapons, like not just fists, with weapons.
Like exactly what happened to you.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if you can say kind of what that initial contact with the police was like when you were the one who had called them.
Yeah, that was like the awfulest thing because I had went out with a knife in my hand and the phone to my ear. They're like, drop your weapons. And I had dropped the weapon. I dropped the knife and I was like, it's me. I'm the one who called. And then they pulled out their mace and maced me in my face. And mind you,
you're already surrendering to them. You're bleeding in your eyes.
Cut open in the face. Mace hit me in the eyes. It was raining on top of that. So the mace drizzled down into the cut in my face and then it trickled down onto my stomach because he had tried to cut me open too. I had like stab wounds on my stomach as well. My body felt like it was on fire. The mace just trickled down into the open wounds. I swear I was in hell.
Even though you dropped the weapon, they had like no
They had
procedure.
a gun pointed to me. They had the mace pointed to me. He even said on set I was almost ready to shoot. Like if you look at the distance between like the knives to say where he like says he shot the mace, like that's a good distance to say like you were safe.
And this was after the weapon was dropped.
After the weapon was dropped, and I had already told them I'm the one that had called the police.
It's my perspective that when anybody looks at your case, it seems like a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense. When you reflect back on the prison system and the criminal justice system, what do you think were the factors that led you to spending those 4 years in there?
Oh, the fact that I was Black, the fact that I was trans, the fact that allies really don't know how to immerse themselves into the integration with our community. I think the only thing that they really realize is the words that they're seeing on a flyer and not the experiences in which we're living.
Yeah.
And that translates to your everyday person who is a police officer, who is a correctional officer, who is a firefighter. And that's something that translates into my experience in the system. It's the fact that I wasn't met with humanity. I was seen as like an object or an animal or an alien. When it came to my court appearances and stuff like that, the judges, when I would walk into the courtroom, like they would have to stare. They showed a bias immediately towards me.
Yeah.
And it took my lawyer a good few times having to correct the judge and the prosecutor on pronouns. That was both with the police and the judges. Back then, I didn't have my name changed. Having to like really let them know who I am and how to address me was another issue because they tried to make it a legality issue, but if you make it a legality issue, then you still have to respect the fact that my name is Moka. They were refusing that fact and they were still using my dead name on me. So I had to go through that type of experience. Again, that was both with police officers and judges. When you're in the court system like that, they try to give that perception that we like to use people's last names. But the violence that they cause verbally when it comes to the transgender community and like the way they expose a trans person, because there's other inmates there with you in the bullpen when they call your name to come out. And they're usually supposed to call you by your last name. But my experience was they were calling me by my first name. So everybody kind of knew because they understand in there too, right? Especially when it comes to like police officers, correctional officers and stuff, and even judges, they know that the inmates get on the phones and they Google people, like their names and stuff like that. So when you give out those types of information, you know, they know that they can cause harm and that's what they're intentionally doing.
Yeah. It's wild that having an experience of constantly being dead named and misgendered by someone when correcting them isn't enough to see that this judge is biased and transphobic towards you. And clearly that's going to result in an unfair case.
I feel like the problem with the justice system is there's no actual evaluation process when it comes to making sure that they're implementing Canadian justice.
Even the most unbiased judge, prosecutor, jury, anybody in like the legal system, the most unbiased person will still have a bias because everybody has a lived experience. And they're going to have just like judgments that they were taught from when they were kids or growing up, what they've seen, what they haven't seen. How can we have just rulings if it's made by one person with one lived experience? But in terms of reintegration into society, can you talk a little bit about how that went for you? Because I know that thanks to a lot of community members, there was a lot of awareness raised for your case, and you got the hashtag Justice for Mocha as well. But how did that feel for you, and how has it been building your life back up post-incarceration?
So being inside, that made me really, really happy to know I had that support. Coming out of the institution was a different story. Have these cameras flashing in my face right away. It was very much, I felt like Cardi B, press, press, press. You ever see that music video when she's walking? She's like, press, press, press. And all you could do is walk. It's true. Like, you just have to walk into the light. Like, that's all I could do, right? So that's what that felt like at first. It was bittersweet because being in the spotlight, I had nothing to do but talk about the experience that led me here, which was, you know, I was still trying to heal from or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, when you're first doing it, you don't realize the change that you start to make immediately. And that's something that uplifted me to make me continue to move forward, because I've been through like suicidal thoughts through all of this and stuff like that. I've been like to the down and the low about it, you know. I felt like it was an opportunity for not just my voice to be heard, but for an experience to end. You know?
That's important.
Yeah. And having seen that type of progression only makes me strive to go even further. That's why I went back to college. That's why I'm in university. I don't ever want those who, you know, took the time to listen to me and share tears with me and say a prayer with me to think that, you know, like that's where it remains.
You've made a lot of big systemic changes within the prison system for trans folks. And I'm wondering if you wanted to speak to that and like the role that you've played within the prison system, like post-incarceration.
So now there is, if you're trans female in a male prison, you have access to the female canteen list. If you are a trans man in a female prison, you have access to the male canteen list. You know, that's for hygiene and uptake and stuff like that. There was also programming. This is something that the system has fell on since then, which needs to be fixed. But I also had programs, LGBTQ programs implemented. The programs were being held by Stacey Love Jolly Kerr from Camp H, but she is no longer running the programs no more is what I found out.
So that's how it fell off.
Yeah, so they won't let me in, obviously, because I have a criminal record, but I'm pushing with like the 519 and Maggie Serrano and stuff to like really get in there, because I'm like, they have no programming whatsoever. You know, these psychologists and psychiatrists in there, they only have one objective on mind, and that's just to put you on anything to say you're crazy. You know, people don't understand how dangerous that is when you're locked into prison and you don't know what to do mentally, and you see those psychiatrists and psychologists, and all they take you as is like somebody who suffers from dysphoria, and they're not really trying to understand or translate the experience of like your case and what you're going through and like how you've been separated from certain things, especially when you feel like that's the only resource or aid of support that you have. You know, these institutions really need the help of the LGBTQ plus community for their trans inmates.
But hold that thought, because this podcast is proudly sponsored by Vizzy Hard Seltzer, a flavor for every vibe.
For our longtime supporters, y'all know that Vizzy has been supporting us and so many other organizations in the queer community for a very long time. So if you are interested in drinking a hard seltzer, we highly recommend supporting Vizzy. Our personal favorites that we're drinking in this episode are the Vizzy Mimosas, which we really, really love, and we highly recommend checking out.
And now, back to the episode.
So on that note, I would love to dive deeper into the broader trans incarceration experience and like explain to our listeners what this is actually looking like. And the first thing I wanted to chat about is placement and housing. So you were held inside of a men's prison for your entire sentence from 2015 to 2018. And something important for our listeners to note is that in 2017, in the middle of your sentence, the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code were amended to include gender identity or expression as protected groups.
Hi.
Yeah, hello. Which moved the Correctional Services of Canada to post an interim policy stating that as a result of these legislative changes, they've adopted new operational practices to allow offenders to be placed in an institution according to their gender identity, unless there's an overriding health or safety concern, which is like a very broad but. From your advocacy experience, do you believe that trans folks are still facing challenges post Bill C-16
Yes.
when being placed in facilities that do align with their gender identity.
Yes. So when you are placed in a facility in the identifying gender that you identify as, you are placed into segregation or onto a special handling unit. And they try to act like placing you on the special handling unit is like placing you onto a regular unit, but you don't get the privileges of a regular unit. You don't get programming, like library, schooling. You're just isolated. Basically, the special handling unit is still the same thing as segregation, how it's operated. So you're out 2 hours a day and you're locked up 22 hours a day.
In isolation?
Yes. And the only privilege that one can acquire is to become a server or a cleaner on the range in order to be out. Even though you might get like an extra 2 or 3 hours out, if you're lucky, you're still pretty much locked up anyways. You're kind of just like left in your cell and not being able to kind of like go onto the range or make a phone call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because, you know, they're letting you out at 9 in the morning, you know?
And to put this into perspective too for our listeners, the United Nations considers indefinite or prolonged periods of solitary confinement to be torture. And yourself, like 90% of incarcerated trans people have been placed and often held in solitary confinement for prolonged periods of time. So this is really like a huge problem that's happening right now. And like despite these human rights, I guess, being recognized, are they really?
It's so weird to say they are, but they are. They're recognized on paper, but they're not recognized on paper because nobody wants to read what's on the paper. But yes, it is this classification of how the UN defines solitary confinement is very much the experience of the transgender experience being incarcerated still to this day.
Why do you believe they're doing this?
You know, for the most laziest reasons, they refuse to change. I see a lot of people go in with intent to change, but then within like 6 months, they're either quitting the job or they've just kind of conformed to what everybody else is doing instead of sticking, to their guns. The system, I feel, especially for like people trying to make a change in it, is very disarming. I find to make systemic change is always better done outside the system than inside the system. People say being inside the system, you can make a lot of change, but it doesn't. It's just a lot of, they try to put you through a whole bunch of different channels, you know?
Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean outside the system?
So people who are inside the system are those like who are ministers, who sit in your House of Parliament. They are police officers. They are judges. They are social workers, correctional officers. These are people inside the system. Like they may have understanding or experience to, you know, aid them in wanting to see better within the system in reformation and rehabilitation and stuff like that. And somebody who is outside the system is more, it's weird because I'm in a limbo right now. If you like, I'm like inside, I have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It's so weird. Right. I'm not trying to go in, y'all. I'm telling you, I'm not trying to go in. You know when they say it's good to be that only black person in the white room? It's not true, okay? It's not true at all. I hate being the only black person in the white room. Hate it. But the person who is on the outside is like an activist or an organization or even like your mom, your community mom or whoever.
Your
like,
mom specifically, you listening at home.
Yeah, right?
Get your mom on the line.
Yeah. You know, those are outside influences that, you know, those are people who make calls who like, oh, well, we just got this call in. You know, they call the system and they say, oh, well, we just got this call. This person is saying this and this and this. Who do I forward them to? You know, they're the ones who have the most impactful change because they're the ones who, they have a scare aspect to them that scares the system.
They have the ability to mobilize groups of people. Like even the Justice for Mocha campaign probably scared a lot of people who were in positions of power. When you're on the inside, there's still that element of control. You're still having to go through all of our administrative channels. They're controlling you. You may have some perceived small changes, but in reality, how much change is really being made is the question.
Do you think it's because when you're outside the system, I mean, technically you're also funding the system. So when you gather in masses, it's also more powerful and more impactful rather than somebody going within it, trying to make a small change that doesn't lead to very much fruition.
Well, if you think about it, everybody who went in to make a change, made a change. You all have been defeated. So it's like, when are you guys going to realize, oh my God, I've been defeated here. You've been defeated here. You've been defeated. Fuck, why are we defeated? You know what I'm saying? And like come together and re-spark your fire, reignite it. You have the power and the ability to do that.
When you're the majority.
They say the flame could die. Those type of flames never die. You know, it's up to you. It's how much willpower you put into it.
Bringing us back to the experience of solitary confinement, I'm wondering, especially with our listeners keeping in mind this being considered a form of torture, I'm wondering if you can actually speak to that experience.
Oh my God, it's like the word, you're just in your head. All you want to do is like sleep because you realize you have nothing else to do. And when you can't sleep, all you do is kind of like lie down and your body starts to like go through these sores and stuff like that. And you can't lie down for too long because you get these bed sores, your body starts to get sweaty and hot and itchy. The cell, you can't really pace in it. So you're really left with just your thought. The torture for me was really being trapped in your head because this is all that's in your head. These are just these thoughts that just ramble and ramble and ramble. And then it moves because you go from the politics of why you're there to your family situation and your circumstances. Then you start to realize like your friends and the resources that you had and the supports that you had and stuff like that. And then you realize none of it is at hand. And this is day after day after day. And there's nobody there besides like a guard to like walk by, you know, and they're not really trying to engage with you. Just a knock on the window. Are you okay? Yeah. You know, they only do that if they see you lying on the floor and they wait like 3 rounds to realize you're in the same position to realize, we have somebody that's dead or sick.
While in prison, many trans folks go through intense gender dysphoria as a result of not having adequate access to gender affirming products and appropriate healthcare. Can you tell us what this experience was like for you?
Oh, it was like the worst for me. I hated the fact that when I could grow facial hair, what a transgender thing to say, when I could grow facial hair. You know what I'm saying? Like, thank God that's so gone.
But hey, that's a beautiful thing. When I could.
Yeah, right?
Can.
Yeah, right? Laser. Love it. Canada Med Laser, especially on the Queensway. I big up my girl Mabel. I just seen her today before I came here, you know?
And that's your tea time tip.
Yeah.
Queensway.
You know what I'm saying? Yes.
Sponsor her.
But yeah, for me, being in there, like the facial hair is what killed me. Yeah. Not being able to do my eyebrows is what killed me. They got bushy. I mean, bushy. It was awful. And my leg, like just the hair was killing me alone, right? And not being able to have makeup or anything, I couldn't pat down the hair to like at least give like I couldn't style it. I couldn't do nothing. That's what really had like the biggest effect on me. I stayed away from the mirrors. I couldn't look at my reflection until I got in the razor and I was able to like shave my face and do my eyebrows, shave my legs and at least breathe again. For me, that was like the biggest thing, was like having access to razors. Sometimes when I used to grow facial hair, I used to shave like 2 or 3 times a day. I used to hate the 5 o'clock after shadow. I would be perfectly fine at an event with friends and having fun, and I would go to the bathroom. Yeah. And when I seen a little something coming, you know what I'm saying? I didn't have no razor in my purse because I decided to take my cute little clutch or something. I was gone. I was back home and I was shaving myself, even if it took an hour to get back home and an hour to get back there, or, you know, to just call it a night. I gotta go, you know? Yeah. But that's what it was like for me. So being in there and like not being able to have that type of access on a daily, that's what really puts a person in a dysphoric state about themselves. And then the worst of the worst about it is like when you're going through it and like the inmates are challenging you on your identity. In your head, like you know how you are presenting. But in reality, you're here with like this full beard on, you know, bushy eyebrows, and they're like, well, look at you.
Yeah.
And you can't really fight that fact because you can't, it kills, you know. And like, what is this green tracksuit? That's all I have. You know what I'm saying? To say I'm a woman in jail is a green tracksuit. Yeah. Like it was the craziest thing. One thing that I experienced a lot being incarcerated in a female institution is the imposter syndrome of gay men saying that they are transgender in order to be not placed in a male prison. And as much as, you know, I hate to say the stigmatization is true, it's true. And who these men are and their charges are mainly for pedophilia, bestiality, or abuse on a senior. These are why these gay men are saying they are transgender so they could go into the women's prison system, because they know even in PC with those charges, you're getting knocked out. Yeah. You know, and it's hard because as much as I could understand how some people need protection for however they ended up in their circumstance. The whole thing is you are degrading a community's foundation.
Yeah.
And you are destructing everything that trans people have fought for, those who are remembered and those who can't be remembered.
I feel like it's actually very harmful, especially with the real like villainization happening of trans folks right now, especially like calling drag queens and trans people pedophiles. Like if you're saying that these are the kinds of people who are taking advantage of the system and there's no checks in place.
And these are men. They're actually men.
And there's no checks in place to make sure, like, was this person doing anything to transition? Do they have any experiences of dysphoria? Like, are they actually a trans person and there aren't those checks and balances happening in place? Then it's actually adding to some wrongful statistics that can be used against our community, which I think is really violent.
I think that points out probably another hole in the system, which is that a lot of these people who are evaluating them and determining whether or not they are
There's
a trans
no
person.
evaluation.
Well,
It's like, obviously when I get arrested, I visually am a transgender woman. These people are getting arrested as men and they trust the fact that these police officers are not doing their job. First thing, okay? These officers are not asking you your gender identity. They do the thing, like whatever. They let that go down when you get inside the institution. When you're at a police station, you know, you have to take the initiative to point that out. You know, so these men are taking the initiative to point that out.
Well, I think also most people within the legal system, probably as it stands, don't really know what a trans person is.
People keep saying that, and I don't think, like, people know what trans people are. It's not
you
that
think
hard.
So? You think, but like, are they, you know?
It's not that hard. For them, it's the whole, I don't understand how you could sleep with this person. You understand what a trans person is. You understand an individual who is born into a gender that they do not want. You know, this is why their expression is one that you may find odd. So
the problem really is not that they don't know, it's that they're having trouble humanizing you is the actual problem.
There is no actual intent, again, to like really understand what these awareness factors are, I find, from these so-called allies. It's just more of a sexual perception. That's why they keep trying to have these conflictions of understanding what the transgender identity is. I don't understand how you could understand a trans umbrella, but you cannot understand a trans identity.
100%. Moving on to this last piece of the conversation is really a discussion around the overarching systemic issues. There's an abundance of data showing an overrepresentation of trans folks in prisons. And according to CAEFS, trans individuals are 10 times more likely to be incarcerated compared to the general population. I'm wondering, why do you believe this is happening?
For a few reasons. One reason is for the fact of people's biases and viewpoints on communities. The next situation is with these viewpoints, even if a story is told of like what transpires. So for example, if a trans person was to call the police and say, my partner attacked me, the trans person would be more likely to get arrested than the partner. It's a very, very weird thing to kind of pinpoint because the solution is clear. You know, don't hold these biases. You're not supposed to carry them, especially as a police officer. But I find, you know, a lot of transgender people, they're incarcerated due to them being victimized. One of the problems is like they think like removal of the transgender person is the best thing in all situations. You know, when this transgender person is not the cause of the issue in the situation, you know. Another reason why I feel like a lot of trans people are victimized and arrested is because, well, what's your name? You know, and then the next question might be like, well, why do you call yourself that? But then like for them, they might be nervous to ask that fact, like, why would you call yourself that? So then the next thing for them to do is like, well, I don't know how to talk to this person. Fuck this, like take her away or take him away. You know what I'm saying? Interactions that really, you know, victimize the trans community.
100%. Doing research for this episode, I even found Prison Policy Initiative found that just queer folks in general are experiencing higher arrest rates and then longer sentences than their straight and cis counterparts. And then among trans folks who are being incarcerated, the vast majority also are people of color. So it is really showing just how deep the prejudices are going.
We've definitely chatted problems. Now let's talk solutions. So what legal and policy changes do you believe are needed to ensure the safety and well-being of transgender inmates?
Malcolm X.
That's it. We're all done.
Malcolm came with the blueprint of integration. At this point in time, mind you, the big social movement at the time was racial segregation.
Yep.
So his specificity to the solution is more dictated towards Black integration, but it does carry all the entities to integrate every community. What Malcolm said was that in order for the Black man to be seen as an equal with the white man, he first must destroy and abolish everything he believes in. And that is the Constitution, it's all its entities and its government branches, and everything that it stands for. And once that is done, it must be rebuilt with the Black man included. So once we're able to have an equal eye, I be your left, you be my right, then we will be able to move forward, because it removes that racial entity where one will just be seen in unity, where, you know, this could be applied to every community. So if you don't only apply the Black man, but you apply the LGBTQ community, the Muslim community to it, these are structures that can be founded and fixed. It's really that solution which will bring the unity and harmony that we want to see.
When a lot of people hear abolish the system as an answer, I think a lot of people maybe feel it's unrealistic and don't know what to do next. You know what I'm saying?
They don't listen.
Yeah.
Us in this day and age, we were given the solutions to the problems we're facing today. It's the fact that nobody is implementing it. And if anybody says something about it, if people are like targeted or isolated or exiled.
Well, people resist change really hard. There's people that they're at a disadvantage from the current system existing and will still preach about the system because they don't know anything else and they're afraid of change.
It's true.
Well, that's the whole thing of colonialism, that colonial mindset. You have to be very careful of that. And a person who believes in change will always challenge fear. And sometimes it's not always good to walk away. If it's not a violent situation where you're like physically being harmed, but if it's an actual debate where you're in these types of environments and you can make these changes, shutting up is never the right thing to do. And I feel like once people get criticized, especially within the community, the first thing they're to do is like suppress themselves and just like shut down, instead of saying like, well, I still think you're wrong and I'll be back tomorrow to tell you why. You know, sometimes we have to leave it there, and then come back to it. Who says you can't pick it up? Yeah.
I like that.
Well, we met back in 2018, I believe. And
we met many moons ago, Emily.
We met many moons ago. And I'm just like really happy to have caught up with you today and to see all the incredible change that you've made since then.
Thank you.
And just like knowing how much more is yet to come for your journey, you know?
And that includes personal change as well. Like what you've done for others, but also what you've done for yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With all that being said, I'm wondering, can you let our audience know where they can find you and if you have anything new coming up, maybe how they can connect with you in that way?
Oh, yeah. So you could definitely follow me on social media. My Instagram is Moka_Dawkins. That's more like my personal one, but whatever. You know, public. I also do have the @JusticeForMoka Instagram. And also make sure to check out my not-for-profit, where I offer transitional health, wellness, and lifestyle advice to people who are undergoing hormone therapy. It is called Tea Time Tips Productions. On Instagram, you could get it at T, just the letter T. Time is spelled Time, and tips is spelled TIPS. And you could always, if you ever are in the need to show support to the transgender community, you could always go to www.gofundme.com/justiceformoka and donate to the campaign, and know that that is where I redistribute the money back into Tea Time Tips to help the community.
In terms of your book,
oh yeah, my book is coming out. Thank you.
Is there any kind of like support that you need in producing and releasing it? I don't know. Someone who's listening may be in publishing, maybe doing something. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
What do you need?
Right now, I'm in the edit processing. Anybody who is willing to aid in revision and editing, that'd be greatly appreciated. I am looking into publishing companies and distribution companies and stuff. I looked at Michelle Obama first, her book, because I was like, I gotta sell as much as Michelle Obama. You know what I'm saying? I was like, I got to sell as much as Michelle Obama. But The Incarcerated Days of a Transgender Woman will be coming out soon. I don't have a release date because I'm still looking for help. So yes, you could definitely reach out to www.mokadawkins.com.
Yeah.
Period.
And follow her to stay up to date for when it does come out.
Yes, and purchase. Don't just look for me to post pages on my story, okay?
Thank you so much, Moka, for joining us today and for being vulnerable and sharing your story. We really do appreciate that.
Thank you.
So that's everything that we have for you today. And if you want to dive deeper into the Black trans experience, make sure to click the video on the left. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, make sure to leave us a 5-star review because it really does help the podcast out. That's everything that we got. And until next time, peace.